thank you very much, everybody, for joining. I'm aware there are some people as well that can't make it live to the session, so we're recording this for the purposes of those that can't be here at the moment. So this session is going to be focusing on the inclusivity of disabled staff here at the University of Wolverhampton. And I wanted to start with this quote on the left-hand side. There is no greater disability in society than the inability to see a person as more. And I hope that that's something that threads through this presentation, that message. So just to give you a little bit of kind of context as to what I'm going to be talking about, I'll give you a little bit of information about who I am and why it is that I'm qualified to talk about this topic. We're going to look a little bit at where we are as a society and as a sector within the HE sector in terms of the inclusion of disabled staff. And then I'm going to focus the attention on our university. Where are we as a university? What work are we doing? Where do we see the priorities lying? I'm going to talk a bit about the institutional charter that we've created, which is called DEAP, which stands for the Disability Equality Action Plan. And I'll explain why this matters. You know, why are we bothering to invest our time and energy in doing this? And then finish with some final thoughts and some food for thought, and hopefully answer any questions that anybody might have. So I'm sure you're aware that the theme of this year's Disability History Month here at the university is becoming disability confident. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is about how we as a university can become more disability confident. I'm based in the School of Sport here at the university. I'm one of the senior lecturers within the School of Sport. My background is actually researching with Paralympic athletes. So my PhD was with the British wheelchair basketball men's and women's teams around London 2012. And more recently, I do work with British Judo, looking at their visually impaired athletes, their Paralympic athletes. And in fact, we have Ian Johns joining us as the Paralympic coach for one of our sessions on the 8th of December next week. But the reason why I'm talking to you here today is because I am one of 3 co-chairs of the Disabled Staff Network. One of my co-chairs, Julian Gwinnett, is here today as well. And I'm the regional lead for the West Midlands of the National Association of Disabled Staff Networks. And it's great that we're joined in this session by Hamid Haroon, who is the chair of that network and who will be delivering the session following on from mine today. I would also add that I have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and this is something I was diagnosed with when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and something that was very debilitating at the time and required me to undertake behavioural therapy and counselling to be able to learn how to manage that condition. And so I have a degree of lived experience as well to draw on. So let's start with kind of where are we within society? Well, currently in society, 21% of the working age population have a disability, and that's around 23% in the West Midlands, slightly higher. And I think that in some ways that's quite a surprise to people that it is that high, but actually disability is one of the protected characteristics that can apply to anyone. Anyone can get a disability at any time, and we're more likely to acquire a disability as we get older. And so it's something that matters to everybody. We also all work with or know somebody that has a disability, or perhaps we don't because they don't disclose it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is the case today and how we can address that. 53.2% of the disabled working age adults are in employment, and that compares to 81.8% of non-disabled individuals, which highlights that there is an employment gap for disabled staff. It can be harder to be recruited into a position and harder to retain that position and to progress within organisations. And the rate of employment also varies within that. So different types of disability of impairment can impact on how likely it is that that person will secure employment. So the employment rate is highest for those with physical disabilities and lowest for those people that have severe or specific learning difficulties. But it is thought that actually by improving the number of disabled people employed in the UK, we would boost our economy by over £13 billion. There is an untapped talent pool. There is lots of individuals who have a wealth of knowledge, experience and skills that we're not necessarily tapping into. We don't just see less individuals with disabilities in employment, there also exists a pay gap. In 2020, disabled people were earning £2.10 less per hour, which is about 20% less than non-disabled individuals. We see less of our disabled staff earning over £50,000 a year compared to non-disabled individuals, with little change happening over the last few years. Disabled people can also struggle to access positions of seniority. Now, we're aware that in relation to gender, there can be a leaky pipeline, so female staff that are failing to or not able to progress into more senior roles. And this glass ceiling can also exist for disabled individuals who can find it harder to progress their careers. And there's a variety of reasons for this, which I will touch upon a little bit later. There were also suggestions that a glass partition can exist, and that actually the horizontal movement of staff with disabilities can also be impacted. There can be a prevalence of barriers. And this can be because of the risk that if you move to a different line manager, you have to come out all over again. You have to go through all your reasonable adjustments again. You risk a line manager that's not as supportive or empathetic. You risk a role that doesn't suit your needs as well. And so this can lead to some disabled individuals wanting continuity and not choosing to move horizontally as well as vertically. Where are we within the sector? So within higher education, there is an underrepresentation of disabled individuals. So there is a rate of about 5.5% of individuals working with HE that have disclosed a disability. And this is remarkably different to students, where the rate is closer to 14.5%, 15%. Disclosure rates also have remained persistently lower for academic staff than those working in the professional services, though in both groups, disclosure rates have increased over time and in the last decade. But if these stats are anything to go by, that suggests there is a real underrepresentation, and that's significant within higher education because we are wanting to be representative of all sectors of society and representative of our students. Students in universities appear to receive a lot of attention and support, but this doesn't appear to be the case or reflected for staff. In fact, a couple of these quotes here share, there seems to be almost that it's unexpected or unusual to see somebody that has a disability working in academia, particularly if you're female as well. So almost the more protected characteristics an individual has, the more scope to experience multiple barriers. But of course, we don't want this to be the case. We want disabled individuals to be well supported. We want our university to be the university of opportunity, where there's opportunities for all, regardless of your protected characteristic. And so this is something that we need to address as a sector. It leads to an invisibility of disability. It leads to there being less staff that we see that have disabilities or talk openly about having disabilities within our communities. And that then leads students to not be able to see themselves in the curriculum and leads to questions over whether higher education is even a source of employment for them. It affects the number of role models. It also affects how normalised disability is. But of course, we're talking about staff that disclose a disability. And there's a large percentage of individuals that have a disability but choose not to disclose it. And that's because of the fear of prejudice, the risk of it leading to disadvantage, assumptions made about their capabilities, and the potential for that to then have a negative impact upon their ability to secure employment, retain that employment, and progress within employment. So ableism tends to be endemic within higher education. And as I mentioned, intersectionality and having a number of different protected characteristics can almost lead to this double or triple jeopardy. But there is more pressure on universities to be more inclusive today. Universities are expected to produce policy documents and annual reports to demonstrate a commitment to disability equality, to write objectives, to write action plans, to review their performance. And we're seeing, greater numbers of equality officers, staff counsellors, staff disabled support officers, common in UK higher education organisations. It's just that the disabled staff themselves don't always report that translating positively into their lived experience. It almost appears as if there can be a disconnect between what the strategies, the frameworks, the policies say, and actually what it's really like on the shop floor or that lived experience. I should have mentioned earlier, but I forgot that I'm also an ERAS fellow at the university. So my fellowship is exploring the lived experience of female disabled staff here at the university. And so some of what I'm talking about here is coming from information that staff have shared with me firsthand, as well as my own personal experience and drawing on the knowledge I have from my involvement in different networks. But of course, if we don't create an environment in which staff feel comfortable to disclose, that will impact upon the disclosure rates that we see. Within our own university, kind of where are we at the moment? Well, in the industry, if I compare kind of similar years, just over 5% of academic staff were declaring a disability and just over 7% of non-academic staff. We're not that dissimilar to that in terms of our academic staff in 2021, our disabled staff accounting for 5.5% of the staff population. And that was translated into 4.5% of academic staff and just over 6% of our professional services staff. But that then means that we don't have as many staff that we see with disabilities to normalise it further. In looking at West Midlands universities, there's a huge difference in terms of the prevalence of disability within staff communities. The average is around 7.3%, but whereas UCB reported only just around 3.5%, for Worcester it was more like 14.5%. And in our figures, the snapshot that was taken at that time, our figures were recorded as 6.22%. So we were sort of, around average. But I think the university themselves would say that there's work to be done and work being done that we need to be promoting and celebrating. Our figures within the university for our student disclosure is nearly 16%. So nearly 16% of our students disclose a disability. If I compare what this looks like in terms of the nature of those disabilities being disclosed, mental health problems being declared by students has risen hugely in the last 10 years. There's been a 752% increase in students reporting mental health conditions and over a 1,000% increase for female students in particular. Mental health problems are the second most disclosed impairment type of our student population. This isn't the case for our staff population, and this raises questions about how stigmatized different conditions are and how this translates in terms of how representative we are for our students. Those with learning difficulties, both specific and general, were the most disclosed by our student population, over double that of those disclosed by staff. So it does appear there's a hierarchy of preference. There are certain conditions that are less stereotyped than others. There are certain conditions that are seen as more disclosable by staff than students. And this may account for some of the reasons why we see such a lower figure for our staff. I just want to share with you a couple of quotes from individuals that I've spoken to about progressing within higher education. Less than 3% of managers, professors and non-academic professionals in higher education have disclosed a disability. Leaders in the academic workforce tend to be predominantly white, male, middle class and non-disabled. And this is a situation that has been described as widespread institutional discrimination. Diversity in leadership is an essential ingredient to success, particularly when we are serving a diverse student population. Our disabled staff here at the university account for 2.42% in terms of men of our senior academic staff and 2.42% for our women. Within the professional services staff, that's 3.23% and 2.42% respectively. So in line with what we're seeing within the sector, within our own university, we're not seeing a huge number of disabled individuals in positions of leadership and being role models. I wouldn't say I mean, those figures are reflective of the percentages of staff we have with disabilities. It's not that our university is being discriminatory in particular. It's just that if you start with lower numbers in the first place, that's going to translate into lower numbers in terms of leadership positions. Some of the issues that are making it more difficult for disabled staff to progress, though, within the sector, not specifically within our institution, are things like sick leave. Disabled staff can find they have to have time off for appointments because they've got conditions that require medical treatments or procedures. And that can then mean that they have to have that time off allocated as sick leave. And this can obviously be a barrier to progression, because then they have concerns that their absenteeism rate will work against them. They can even be in a position where they're called in front of HR to explain their absence rates. Higher education also has a long hours culture, and that presents real challenges. Because we are expected to work sort of more hours if we go into positions of leadership, if you're a disabled individual who is already experiencing a greater level of fatigue to do your current job, and more fatigue than a non-disabled person might experience, that is then going to be a factor in your mind when you're thinking about whether you wish to progress your career and assume a leadership position where you have to try and find even more time that impinges on your own time. And so this is a key challenge, I think, for our sector. In terms of at the University of Wolverhampton, some of these things you can see on the screen reflect our current culture. We have Vision 2030, which outlines the culture of the university and a desire for staff and students to feel that they belong and are empowered to succeed. Staff at the university have different lived experiences, and so the university talks about inclusivity being essential and needing to be at the heart of everything that we do, and students needing to be able to see themselves in the curriculum. However, as I mentioned, data from my research seems to suggest that that doesn't always filter down to the lived experience, that we have this fantastic idea in theory, but in practice that doesn't necessarily translate. The CARE framework is a list of behaviours that the university shares and values, and it stands for collaborative, ambitious, respectful and effective. What some of the disabled staff report is that actually this can prove a challenge in itself, because let's say you have a condition such as dyslexia and you inadvertently interrupt others when they're talking. That can come across as being disrespectful, when in fact it's not necessarily that's the intention to be the case. We are a disability confident level 1 employer. It would be great for us to progress on from here and to become a leader in the sector. Within our latest access and participation plan, our recruitment of students with disabilities is the only access area in which we underperform against benchmark figures. And so this has been identified as something that needs to be addressed. And there's an argument to suggest that if we support our disabled staff effectively, and if we recruit more disabled staff, we have the potential to in turn attract a greater number of students with disabilities who see this as a very inclusive environment. Within the REF 2021 Equality Impact Assessment, it was identified that there was a need to better understand the non-disclosure of disability, because some individuals were choosing not to disclose a disability in that report or when becoming part of the REF, the articles submitted. And so it is being highlighted that we do have some areas to work on. Really interestingly, for race, we have the Race Equality Charter. For gender, we have Athena Swan, but there is currently no national framework from Advanced HE or elsewhere for disability. And I would say this is really very much conspicuous by its absence. As a result of this, we've made a decision at the university to create our own institutional staff charter, and it is known as DEAP. DEAP was something that was talked about last year, and an action plan was created, and this was accepted last June this year. It is now being operationalised this year, and I am the operational lead for DEAP. That is my role within the network. So I want to share with you some of what we are trying to achieve with DEAP and why. It is based on the affirmation model of disability. So this is the non-tragic view of disability, rather than the medical model that sees disability as a personal ball and chain and something that the individual has to overcome in a very medicalised view, or the social model that looks at society as being the cause of some of the social oppression, stigmatisation, and structural barriers that individuals with disabilities can experience. The affirmation model is saying disability doesn't have to be seen as a problem at all. It's a non-tragic view. And actually, we all have unique skills, experiences, and qualities that we can draw upon. I think a key message from today is that having a disability doesn't have to equal disadvantage. And actually, there are many advantages to having disabilities, because we have individuals that can think in different ways, and we need a diverse workforce. So we're sort of entering new territory really with DEAP, and it's quite an exciting time for the university. There are conversations now starting to happen about a national charter, and we want a seat at that table. We want to make sure that we're involved in leading on some of this work. So within our action plan, we've identified short, medium, and long-term actions that we want to implement over the course of the next year or so. So short-term actions are those to achieve within the first 3 months, medium more within 6 months, and then long-term 12 months or beyond. And I wanted to share with you some of the early successes that we've had, so you have a bit of a flavour of what DEAP is all about. So we have reviewed the language of disclosure that's being used by HR in relation to disability, because the existing language was sometimes conflating different impairment types, or they were appearing in more than one category, leading to confusion and staff not necessarily feeling compelled to disclose. We will subsequently be inviting staff to review whether they wish to disclose a disability in the future. We are keen to try and make sure that our figures are more reflective of reality, but also that the university is being proactive and making itself an environment that is excellent for disabled staff rather than being reactive. And I would caveat all of this by saying that I'm not here to say that if you have a disability, you have to disclose it. I very much feel it's a personal choice, and individuals have to determine if that's the choice for them. But we want to create an environment in which it's a safe space to disclose, where individuals don't have to fear discrimination if they do. We have reviewed our policy in relation to recruitment and selection and are continuing to do so to allow candidates to be able to see questions in advance if, for example, they're neurodiverse, to support that process and ensure that they're not disadvantaged. We are trying to increase the visibility of our disabled staff, and certainly Disability History Month is a great place to start. We've had 10 members of our disabled staff network that have already completed or are going to complete podcasts as part of Adam Vasco's Diverse Hub podcast series that is looking at how do we make the boat go faster. And I would strongly invite you, urge you to listen back to some of those podcasts. Our very own Julian has done one about A Beautiful Curse, his experience of autism. We have one from a line manager's perspective with Phil Gravestock. There's one of Julian, myself, Karenza and Adam talking about DEAP and inclusion within our university. We've also had staff share podcasts, provide quotes in support of some of the work that we're doing. And I think it's really important that our staff are seen, that we get a chance to hear their stories and learn from them. In terms of a reasonable adjustment passports, we've just had this agreed and signed off. And I think that Adam hopefully is sharing this in the chat whilst I speak. But in essence, this is something that will follow the member of staff through their career at the university. So the idea is that you only have to sit with one line manager once and go through this form off the back of an occupational health assessment. Whatever reasonable adjustments have been identified, you talk through them with a line manager, they are agreed. There's a flow chart for line managers to follow to try and make this process as streamlined and simple as possible. The information is recorded on this passport and it follows you wherever you go in the institution to try and break down these barriers that I've mentioned with regard to vertical or horizontal movement. So you don't have to have repeated conversations and constantly renegotiating reasonable adjustments. We've also got the DSN Teams channel now, and please do join us if you're happy to. Members can see who each other are, so if you are not comfortable with somebody knowing you have a disability, then obviously it's not appropriate to join that Teams channel. But it's a platform within which we can share information, ideas, stories. Some of the events that are being put on for Disability History Month are some of the successes we're having, and we want to build upon these going forward. So We've got discussions coming up in the next week or so from Thriving to Work, talking about their role and what they do. The Thomas Pilkington Trust, who are a charity for blind individuals. We've got next week a panel discussion in conjunction with Athena Swan, where we've got Rachel Murray talking about her life as an asthma advocate, and we've got the British Judo Paralympic coach Ian Johns coming into that panel discussion as well. So there are a variety of different activities available to get involved in, but that give you a flavour of some of the work that we're focusing on. In the pipeline, there are more things happening. We are scheduling a meeting at the moment with HR to discuss a variety of matters, including guidance on working from home. As the co-chairs, we are receiving inquiries from staff asking for clarity about whether working from home falls under a reasonable adjustment, which is protected by law under the Equalities Act, or whether it falls under flexible or agile working. And we've asked to have a meeting to discuss these issues, to ensure clarity of the advice that we're giving, and to make sure that we're all on the same page, so that if staff feel that they need to be working from home as a result of their disability, that's something that we have a framework for. We also want to discuss with them the idea of introducing disability leave, a policy that means that staff can, if they attend appointments, have that go down as disability leave and not eat into their sick leave, so that isn't a barrier to their career progression. We're looking at centralising reasonable adjustments to ensure consistency of practice, so that it's not localised and inconsistent across different faculties or departments. We're looking at disability training for line managers and understanding there are experts within our own network and within our own institution to draw upon. And we're looking at reintroducing the cancer policy. So there's going to be lots more going on. This is a working document, DEAP, and whilst it's been agreed at executive level, and so we can't just add anything we want into it, we do want to make sure that we continue to push on with all disability matters. So it's really important that you share with us if you're experiencing a particular challenge, so that we're able to introduce that to each other, to share it with members of HR, to include it within DEAP, add it into an existing action, to make sure that we are reaping as many benefits as we possibly can do. But this is an exciting time. It's an exciting time for us in the DSN, as it's an exciting time for the university to be at the forefront of this. What I would say that we have done that other institutions haven't is that we have very much based DEAP on the lived experience of our staff. And that's how it differs from the policies I mentioned earlier, where it's a kind of more sort of top-down approach. I don't really like this phrase of kind of bottom-up, but we are focusing what we're doing on asking our disabled staff what matters to them and reflecting that in the actions and reflecting that in how we are advocating for those staff. And we're keen to set up an advocacy network so that individuals can be allies for each other and support one another, including non-disabled individuals, helping us to challenge microaggressions and really create an environment and a culture here at the university that's as positive as it possibly can be. So there is a lot of things, a lot of work to be done. You know, I'm not here to say that we've cracked it, but we're making positive progress and we are keen to really build upon that. And I would hope to be able to update you on our progress again in about 6 months' time at the Inclusivity conference in June. A couple of things that we're also doing that I think are useful to know about. We're creating a disability conference webpage that's a kind of one-stop shop for all matters disability related for staff and line managers, so that people can go to one place and access a document or a flowchart or the reasonable adjustments passport. We want to look at analysing data to compare the progression rates of our disabled staff with non-disabled staff. We want to establish if there's any pay gap. We want to promote awareness of schemes, whether it's the Sunflower scheme or autism alert cards. And we want to make sure, excuse me, that we make our disabled staff as visible as possible in marketing materials and showcase the great things that the staff are doing. And so why does all of this matter? Why are we doing this? Well, in essence, we want to reduce discrimination, break through the glass partitions and ceilings, create a better lived experience for our staff and better serve our student community. I've spoken to staff members who've been fantastically candid in their sharing of experiences, but talking about how through their own disclosure of a disability and admission of vulnerability, that has led students to feeling that they can then share information with that member of staff, whether it's disability related or not. It opens up avenues to explore some of these issues, and it's really important, I think, that students have those opportunities. So it makes us better teachers in effect. It's about us becoming a sector leader, and it's about us being at the forefront of inclusivity. And so there's just a couple of quotes here that I want to share that I think are really important. We can't be an inclusive community for our students without being an inclusive community for our staff. And if we're to overcome the deep structural social inequities and inequalities that have historically so entrenched in elitist higher education systems, then addressing inclusion is a challenge we need to get to grips with. Apologies that my mother-in-law has just walked behind me and back. She's going on a school trip with my youngest daughter today, so she's obviously come in to get something and walk out. Okay, final thoughts. Disabled people are great. You know, disabled people have a variety of different skills. They think in different ways. They think outside the box. We have different skills and experiences because we've had different experiences in life. And the photographs you see here are a reflection of that. This is being recognised, I think. Oh, this is being recognised more and more. Okay, we're starting to see employers better appreciate the skills, experiences and qualities that disabled staff can have, and are targeting particular individuals with types of disabilities that lend themselves to being highly productive in certain workforces. Let's make sure that we continue to be at the forefront of this and keep pushing things forward. I'd like to finish by saying, please get involved. If you're a disabled member of staff and you haven't joined the DSN, please email me so that you can, join that network. It's a fantastic support network. If you have a disability and you don't want it to be disclosed, you can still join the network without disclosing it, because we blind copy everybody into our correspondence. So it's only if you attend a meeting that obviously your name or your face will appear on the screen. The DSN Teams channel I've already mentioned. If DEAP is something that you feel interested in and want to engage in, please join the staff experience group. We're going to be continuing to adopt the same process as we have done throughout, and canvassing opinion from our disabled staff. So please let me know if you would be interested in joining that group and talk to us. You individuals, whether you have a disability or not, we're here to kind of serve you, to support you. So please drop us an email if we can do that. The next session that's running is with Hamid Haroon. As I said, he is the fabulous chair of the National Association of Disabled Staff Networks. And he's going to sort of add on to what I've been talking about here in giving a wider sector perspective and in talking about what's happening within the higher education sector and touching upon a national charter. I have a meeting next week with Advanced HE to ask them some questions about this national charter, and I'm keen to really be involved in moving things forward. So we do have a meeting set up in January with some of the representatives from NADSN to talk a little bit about how that might look and whether Advanced HE are the ones to take it on, whether NADSN might be the ones to take it on, because I think it's really important that a charter is not just a piece of paper or a tick box exercise, but something that actually makes a workable difference. I believe Adam is sharing in the Zoom chat how you can access Hamid's session if you are interested in that. Otherwise, all I have left to say is thank you very much for your time and your patience as I've waffled on. And if there's any questions, I would love to answer them now.
Thanks, Mel. That was great. Well done. You didn't waffle on at all. That was really good, really concise and got to it. And great work that's going on. And thank you to you and Julian and all the co-chairs and the network itself for the event. There aren't any questions that have come through, but I've got some. So you'll be unsurprised to know, Mel. So I'm going to throw some at you, keep you on your toes. And I am going to keep you on your toes with the questions. So DEAP is great, and I think the staff network is fantastic. I'm very interested in the complexities of intersectionality, where people might occupy those intersectional spaces. And I suppose to put that into a question, can people be members of multiple staff networks first and foremost?
Yes, they can. Yeah, there's no limits how many staff networks you can be a part of. So you know, women that I've spoken to as part of my fellowship work, my research, are often members of the WSN, the Women's Staff Network, and the DSN, the Disabled Staff Network, and no, one doesn't preclude the other at all. And actually, I think we're trying to do more joined up thinking amongst the networks to ensure that we are not reinventing the wheel all the time. Some of the things that staff have spoken to me about during the research has been the challenge of being a disabled person and having children and childcare responsibilities and the juggle of that, and working from home, working on campus and so on. And you know, intersectionality is something that we really need to appreciate, because we're more likely, if we understand the complexities of the issues and the different protected characteristics, to be able to come up with solutions and ideas and more flexible, diverse ways of thinking to, you know, empower individuals within the university and the sector to work to the best of their ability.
Brilliant. And yeah, great answer. Thank you very much. And I guess the next thing I wanted to talk about is I'm really struck by the idea of an advocacy network. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that? And I realise you've got limited time to do that.
Yeah, certainly. So the idea is that we feel as if there's often individuals might call upon us as staff chairs if they need some support to attend a meeting with HR, to kind of champion them, to know their rights, that kind of thing. And whilst we're happy to do that, it sort of led to this idea of actually, can we be providing an advocacy network where individuals support each other, and even where individuals that have different types of disabilities are able to share knowledge and ideas with others that have that type of disability. So we want to almost create a kind of directory, if you like, of individuals that form part of this advocacy network, who can then support others within the network, or who can be called upon by a line manager who's discovered they've got a colleague who's got autism, but they don't know anything about it. And they maybe reach out to the person who's the advocate for neurodiversity, for example. But also we want this to be open to people that don't have disabilities as well, to become allies, to challenge microaggressions, to not just be sort of passively seeing these things happening, but actively kind of challenging them, because that's how we're going to create a really inclusive environment. I don't know, Julian, whether you want to add anything in relation to the advocacy network that I haven't thought of.
Am I muted?
No, you're fine.
No. Yeah, I also see it as a situation, for instance, where staff, for instance, who might actually be exploring whether or not they want to go forward with the diagnosis, might actually have the opportunity to have a conversation with somebody who's already gone through that process themselves, to be able to help and support them during that period. You know, I mean, I also see how we could extend it beyond just literally just like a peer-to-peer sort of like advocacy network for staff, but also students as well, and also be able to help staff as well who have students with complex needs, to be able to give them that support and understanding that they feel that they need as well. I think there are many ways in which an advocacy network can work as in terms of creating that sort of like understanding and knowledge base within our institution and beyond, even about how we sort of like literally think about disability differently, and we embrace disability in a positive way.
Absolutely, and some of that really comes through. And no, we've had some conversations, some ideas about some of the work that can possibly transfer over with our students as well. So thank you, Julian. I'm going to put you finally both on the spot for one final question. So the theme is around disability confidence. So if you were leaving us with something to take away in us being, all of us becoming more disability confident, could you, and I know one thing is a bit pathetic, but I'm going to put you on the spot for one thing, and I'll say ladies first.
I think that it's about talking about disability. It doesn't need to be a taboo. It's not something that we want to be stigmatized. Disability is not a dirty secret, but actually, you know, talk openly about it. And that, I'm not saying this to individuals that have a disability that don't feel comfortable disclosing, because as I said, I think that's a personal choice. But actually, if you're a line manager and you've got somebody that has a disability who you're working with, don't be afraid to ask them. They're the experts of their disability. Ask them about it. Ask them how you can support them. Encourage them to feel they can talk to you and be empathetic. And actually, if we talk about our disabilities with our colleagues, you don't know who's listening. I've spoken to women that have talked about the fact that I have this condition, I'm diabetic, and somebody else in my office is diabetic. And based on how people talk about him, it's put me off disclosing. But actually, if we talk about disability as something that doesn't have to be negative, but can be positive, and we talk openly, disability becomes more normalised. I very much believe that everybody has a disability. It's just that society dictates which is labelled that way. Some people can't sing, some people can't cook, some people can't walk. And actually, I think the more we talk about disability, the less kind of significant it needs to be and the more normalised it is.
Fantastic.
Julian,
so a question has come in from Julia Clark. So she said, thank you very much, Mel and Julian, for the talk, and to the colleagues for leading the way on this for universities. Can you say a bit about how we might work in partnership with other organisations in the region? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, part of my role as being regional lead of NADSN means that there's a responsibility on me to try and share within the West Midlands what we're doing, and also kind of speak to like-minded individuals. Hamid's just, perfect timing there. But also, we're keen to make sure that we are sharing best practices and learning from other organisations. So, for example, the meeting I mentioned with some colleagues from NADSN in January is starting to talk about a charter, a national charter. And we're aware that there is some work going on at Lincoln and in other organisations where they're looking at frameworks, but we seem to be one of the first universities to really have taken the approach we've taken with this. So it's about us connecting with those individuals through those different networks or through those different means to share what we're doing, but to also lead on what we're doing, so that as a university, we make sure that as the University of Opportunity, we are creating a culture where we can be a blueprint for other institutions, whilst accepting that we don't have all the knowledge and we've still got a lot of work to do, and really drawing on the experiences of colleagues in other institutions. And Hamid, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
You've got it down perfectly, Mel. Exactly what you've said. I mean, your energy and drive is amazing, Mel, and what you're doing at Wolverhampton with your Disabled Staff Network is exactly what we need to get those voices heard and people's actual experiences, to change a system that just doesn't work for all of us. So yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you, Mel.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I mean, I'm not a one-man band or one-woman band. There's a lot of people who are doing a lot of work, and we've got fantastic members who are prepared to put themselves out there and do blogs and podcasts and, get involved in a whole host of things. But I hope this has been useful for some, and thank you very much, everybody, for your time. Hamid will be doing his talk next, so you can access the link in the chat to go and join him. I think he'll be rushing off there, ready to do the Zoom check, and I will be joining him there momentarily. Thank you very much, and also Adam, to you for being my right-hand man.
No, on behalf of the university, thank you for the network of what you're doing, and yeah, thank you, Julian, and thank you, Melanie, and Hamid. Look forward to seeing your session shortly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Please feel free to get in touch if there's anything I can help with.